What if one tiny village could break the story of the entire Middle East? There's a place on Earth that barely makes the map. A windswept pocket near the Dead Sea, tucked away in the folds of southern Jordan. It's quiet, remote, forgotten. But in 2005, when a team of geneticists collected DNA from this tiny community, they found something that should have been impossible. The Y chromosome data didn't just surprise them, it shattered every assumption they had about Middle Eastern ancestry. Instead of the usual Levantine signature, the Semitic haplogroup J-M267, which dominates Aman and the wider Arab world, this village showed something else entirely. 40% of the men carried 1,173 rand. Another 31% carried E3B3A-M34. These weren't just uncommon, they were virtually unknown in the region. R1 had only been found in similar frequencies in parts of northern Cameroon. E3B3A? More often in Ethiopia than Arabia. This wasn't a fluke. This was a genetic rebellion against the historical narrative. One so bold, it forced scientists to rethink how genes survive, evolve, and sometimes vanish. Because just a few hours north in Amman, Jordan's capital, the DNA told a very different story. Over 40% of the population carried haplogroup J-M267, the genetic heartbeat of the Semitic-speaking world. Their ancestry aligned perfectly with Palestinians, Bedouins, and Iraqi Jews. But here, in this one Dead Sea community, something ancient had survived. Something isolated, untouched, a time capsule locked by geography, amplified by centuries of founder effects and genetic drift. It was like looking into a mirror from 4,000 years ago, and realizing the reflection didn't match. Was this a pocket of forgotten African ancestry, a migration we never recorded, or the aftermath of a single ancient caravan that never left? Whatever the truth, it doesn't live in books, it lives in blood. To understand this anomaly, we must rewind history to the Bronze Age and confront a buried legacy. Because the anomaly near the Dead Sea wasn't random. It wasn't just a twist of isolation or chance. It was a fossilized memory, genetic evidence left behind by a people we thought no longer existed. What if the people thought to be annihilated were never gone at all? For thousands of years, the story has been told the same way, that the Canaanites, the ancient people of the southern Levant, were wiped out. That when the Israelites came, they conquered and destroyed. Cities were burned, civilizations erased, bloodlines lost. But DNA doesn't lie, and what it whispers now is revolutionary. In 2020, researchers analysing ancient bones from Sidon in Lebanon made a stunning discovery. Over 90% of modern Lebanese DNA matches the Bronze Age Canaanites. That was just the beginning. More genome-wide studies, including samples from northern Israel, Jordan and southern Syria, showed the same. Result: a shared genetic backbone that stretches back 3,700 years. In modern Jordanians, up to 87% of their ancestry still comes from these same Bronze Age populations, not conquerors, not replacements, descendants. And then came the deeper layer, the origins of the Canaanites themselves. Geneticists trace their ancestry to a fusion between local Neolithic Levantine farmers and a wave of migrants from the Zagros Mountains in modern-day Iran around 2000 BCE. These groups mixed to form a genetically unified population that would shape the entire Levant for the next 1,500 years. This means that from the Neolithic through the Iron Age, despite wars, empires and invasions, the people of Jordan and the Levant remained fundamentally the same. They may have changed languages, religions and rulers, but in their bones they were still Canaanite. It wasn't annihilation, it was a transformation, not a vanished people, but an evolving identity, buried beneath centuries of rewritten history. But who were the kingdoms that rose from these ashes? And what legacy did they leave behind in Jordanian bloodlines? Because that legacy didn't just survive. It still breathes, hidden in plain sight. What if Jordanians today aren't just related to ancient kings, but are walking on top of their kingdoms without even knowing it? Here's the twist. The kingdoms of Moab, Ammon and Edom, long treated as myth, as footnotes, were never erased by time. They evolved, they adapted, and according to the latest archaeological and genetic evidence, they are still here, in blood, in soil, and even in names. In 2020, a comparative genome analysis of ancient Levantine remains showed strong Bronze to Iron Age genetic continuity across the Transjordan region, especially in areas linked to these biblical kingdoms. Source: Agranat Tamir et al., Cell 2020. At the same time, archaeologists uncovered monumental evidence. At Kirbat en-Nahas, a massive copper production site in ancient Edom, researchers found industrial-scale metallurgy dating back to 1100 BCE, proof of political complexity once thought impossible for a tribal people. Source: Levy et al., Penis, 2008. In Moab, the Mesha Stele, dated to 840 BCE, stands as an irrefutable witness. Written in Moabite script, it names King Mesha, boasts of battles against Israel, and confirms the existence of Dibon, a real Moabite capital. British Museum, inscription KAI 181. But here's the twist buried deeper than stone. These weren't outsiders. The people of Ammon, Moab and Edom were biologically continuous with their Bronze Age ancestors. They didn't migrate in. They never left. The exile narratives, political myths, the conquest stories, mostly symbolic. Modern genetic surveys show that Jordanians, especially those in regions once ruled by these kingdoms, retain the same core genome as their Iron Age predecessors. Source: Haber et al., American Journal of Human Genetics, 2017. No demographic collapse, no total cultural replacement, just 3,000 years of evolution, right on the same land. So when you walk through Karak, Madaba or Tafela, you're not walking through ruins. You're walking across the buried capitals of ancient nations, and the people passing you by, maybe their direct descendants. Yet even as empires rose and fell, one story was just beginning, a transformation that would reshape the Levant without a single drop of blood. Because this wasn't a story of swords, it was a story of silence, of voices changing, while bloodlines stayed the same. What if the Arab conquest changed language and religion, but not DNA? In the 7th century CE, Islam arrived in the Levant, and with it came Arabic, a new language, a new identity, a new world. But here's the contradiction. While mosques rose and old gods fell, the people themselves didn't disappear. Historical records confirm that the number of actual migrants from the Arabian Peninsula was small. Roughly 250,000 Arabs settled in the entire Levant by the end of the 1st century after conquest. Source: Donner, The Early Islamic Conquests, 1981. A fraction, the cities they entered, mostly depopulated, abandoned by earlier inhabitants, shaken by wars and plagues. Arab armies didn't need to erase. They simply arrived and converted. Source: Hoyland in God's Path, 2014. What followed was not a replacement, but a revolution of identity. Genetic studies prove it. In Haber et al. 2017, genome-wide analysis of levantine populations, including Jordanians, showed that the dominant ancestry remains Bronze Age Canaanite and Iron Age Levantine, with minor Arabian components entering later. Even in Bedouin tribes, whose identities are strongly Arab, the majority of their genome is pre-Islamic. Source: Cell 2020. So what does that mean? It means that most people in Jordan today, especially in the North and Central Highlands, are not the descendants of Arabian tribes. They are Canaanites, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites. Their tongues changed and their prayers changed, but their roots never moved. Arabization, then, wasn't a conquest of blood. It was a quiet revolution of language, belief, and names. But what if the story goes deeper, beyond recorded history, into the first human footsteps on Jordanian soil? Deeper than kingdoms, deeper than scripture, into a time before gods or names, when footsteps were not yet written in history, but pressed into ancient mud. What if Jordan was not a dead end, but a launchpad for humanity? For decades, we were told that humanity left Africa through a narrow gate. One route, one crossing, one direction. But new evidence buries that theory beneath the rocks of Jordan's Rift Valley. Archaeologists have unearthed Middle Paleolithic tools in this region, dated between 80,000 and 120,000 years ago, at sites like Chasm Mushesh and Wadi Hassa. These aren't random flint fragments, they belong to a toolkit that matches early Homo sapiens, the first wanderers. Source: Rose et al., Science, 2011. And they were here, tens of thousands of years before the official out-of-Africa path through the Sinai or Bab el-Mandeb was even accepted. But it wasn't just about the tools, it was the land itself. Jordan in that ancient age wasn't dry and broken, it was green, fed by monsoon cycles, dotted with lakes, rivers and wild grasslands. A bridge, not a barrier. Geneticists now believe this corridor was more than a route. It was a lifeline, a second migration highway that split from Africa and passed north, through Jordan, into the Levant, and possibly into southern Europe. Source: Sherry et al., Nature, 2018. In modern Jordanian genomes, researchers have traced deep-rooted African lineages, not recent, but ancient. Haplogroups like L and M1, found especially in isolated communities, match some of the earliest African maternal lines ever recorded in the region. Source: D'Atanasio et al., Genome Biology, 2018. This means Jordan wasn't just a recipient of history, so it was a sender, a starting point. The earliest migrations didn't bypass Jordan, they may have begun here. If Jordan was a cradle of movement, who else passed through that we never expected? Someone did. Someone no one imagined. What if Bronze Age Jordanians shared DNA with East Asians, centuries before the Silk Road? In 2024, something strange was pulled from the ground at Pella, an ancient city in Jordan's northern hills, once a Canaanite stronghold, later a Decapolis town under Rome. But what the excavation teams found wasn't pottery or coins, it was DNA. And it didn't match anything they were prepared for. One of the Bronze to Iron Age individuals tested from the site showed affinities not to nearby Levantines or Mesopotamians, but to East Asian populations, specifically gene flow patterns linked to Northeast Asia. Source: Unpublished Pella Excavation Genomic Report, 2024. No trade routes explain it. The Silk Road didn't exist yet. No records of migration or marriage between Jordan and East Asia. And yet, there it was, buried under centuries of silence. Some archaeogeneticists now believe that this signal doesn't come from the classical period, but from much earlier, the Neolithic or even Upper Paleolithic, when isolated migrations across Central Asia may have carried Eastern genes westward, long before empire, script or civilization. Could these have been seasonal migrants, prehistoric wanderers, early herders who left no stories, only genes? This isn't just a genetic anomaly. It forces us to rewrite how we think about ancient Jordan, not as a regional backwater, but as a crossroads of deep time. It also suggests that long before diplomatic envoys or merchant caravans crossed Asia, the DNA already had. Jordan's bones whisper secrets no map can explain, because deep beneath the archaeology is a memory of migrations even our ancestors never knew. But one region in Jordan tells an even stranger tale, where African, Eurasian and lost lineages collide. And that region isn't a capital. It's not a kingdom. It's a whisper, a forgotten village clinging to the salt-crusted edge of the Dead Sea. What if a forgotten village on the edge of the Dead Sea preserved Africa's oldest secrets? In a small community just south of the Dead Sea, researchers ran routine DNA sampling. They expected the usual: J lineages, a trace of E, the regional genetic script. But what came back shook them. This one group, isolated, quiet, largely unknown, carried 19% sub-Saharan mitochondrial lineages. That's nearly 1 in 5 maternal lines pointing not to Arabia, not even to North Africa, but deep into the sub-Saharan belt. Source: Al-Shamali et al. BMC Genetics, 2009. And then it got stranger. Haplogroup U3, an ancient Eurasian maternal marker linked to early Neolithic expansions and possible Caucasus ancestry, showed up at 39% frequency, one of the highest ever recorded in the Middle East. Source: Richards et al., American Journal of Human Genetics, 2000. This wasn't a community touched by one wave, it was a collision point, a fossilized record of gene flow from Africa, from Eurasia, from the ancient Levant itself, all swirling in a tiny human mosaic. Some theories point to early trade routes, others to Islamic-era slavery, which brought East African lineages into Jordan. But genetic drift, founder effects, and geographic isolation kept this pocket frozen in time. This village became a biological time capsule, one untouched by the homogenizing waves of the empire. Here, a child might carry the genome of a Neolithic farmer, an East African herder, and a Levantine Bronze Age matriarch, all in the same cell. It's not just a sample. It's a memory of migration, encoded in blood, forgotten by history, but preserved by isolation. But in the heart of the Levant, one more riddle remains. How can people change so much without changing at all? Maybe the answer is they didn't. They just changed what they wore, what they prayed for, what they called themselves. Can a people adopt every custom of a culture without sharing its DNA? We often think identity is genetic, that language, religion, architecture all track neatly with blood, but history disagrees. The pots versus people debate has haunted archaeology for decades. When you find foreign pottery in a dig, does it mean foreigners lived there? Or just that locals copied a style? Take the Punic settlements. Across North Africa, these cities carried Levantine gods, Levantine alphabets, Levantine rituals. Everything screamed Phoenician. But when ancient DNA was tested, the twist came fast. Most of the people weren't genetically Levantine at all. Source: Fernandez et al., Science Advances, 2021. Now, rewind to Jordan. When Arabs brought Islam and the Arabic language in the 7th century, the land changed. On the surface, temples turned to mosques, scripts changed, names changed, but under the skin, the DNA still whispered something older, something Canaanite, something Bronze Age. Source: Haber et al., American Journal of Human Genetics, 2017. So what does that mean? It means that culture, for all its beauty, is a costume. It can be borrowed, traded, even forced. But the genome? That's the archive no invader can erase. This isn't just about history. It's about how we see ourselves. We wear cultural labels. But our cells carry secrets our ancestors never spoke aloud. If culture lies and the genes whisper truths, then what happens when we listen to both at once? Because the whispers become voices, voices that echo through centuries. What if the kings of Moab and Edom walk among us and don't even know it? Here's the twist. When we peel back the layers of time, some modern-day Jordanians may be more than descendants. They may be heirs to Iron Age royalty. Their surnames, their tribal traditions, even the rhythm of their prayers, all echo secrets older than history. Take the tribes of Bani Hamida and Al-Matmid, whose oral origin stories claim descent from ancient Ammon and Edom clans. Folklore or fact? Recent genetic sampling reveals high continuity, even after layers of Roman soldiers, Crusader knights, and Ottoman governors ruled. These tribal lineages show less than 5% admixture from those historical invaders, retaining Bronze Iron Age Levantine genomes. Source: Haber et al., AJHG, 2017. In some villages near the Wadi Araba, locals carry surnames like Al-Moabi or Al-Amari, faint echoes of Moab and Ammon. In Petra, families guard rituals, pottery styles, and local legends that seem timeless. Because they are. The DNA tells the same story. A genome-wide survey of rural South Jordan, published in 2022, showed remarkable genetic continuity with Iron Age Transjordan, despite Roman, Arab and Ottoman eras passing overhead. Source: Weiss et al., Nature Communications, 2022. So these aren't just communities, they are living dynasties, guardians of a lineage that spans over 3,000 years. But let us tread carefully. There's a fine line between pride and myth, between ancestral legacy and genetic nationalism. Knowing DNA can deepen identity, or trap it in ancient bloodlines. What must we remember? That these kingdoms still breathe, through people unaware of their heritage, through traditions and names that resist erasure. Yet these are not trophies. They are threads, fragile, powerful, and need humility to honour. But the deepest mystery may still lie beneath the sand, in graves not yet opened and stories not yet told. And that's the riddle, isn't it? That somewhere, under layers of dust and silence, lies a tooth, a fragment of skull, a bone no longer named, but still whispering its story in genetic code. What if the next great rewrite of history is just one excavation away? Because Jordan isn't just a witness to ancient migrations. It's a vault, a genetic library sealed in limestone, mud brick, and memory. But unlocking it, that's the struggle. Unlike other parts of the world, digging into ancient graves here isn't just about tools and permits. It's about reverence, religion, the sacredness of the dead, Islamic law, cultural tradition, and political sensitivities often make human remains untouchable. And yet, the desire grows. In the last 5 years, Jordanian and international teams have begun to test the edges of what's possible. Tooth enamel, bone collagen, even soil samples around burial sites have yielded traceable DNA. Enough to build partial genomes, enough to reopen lost timelines. But it's not just a technical puzzle, it's a trust puzzle. For geneticists to work, historians must be brave, religious scholars must be open, communities must feel seen, not studied. Because this isn't about proving purity, it's about honouring continuity. It's about reconnecting. Jordan could hold the missing chapters of the Levantine genetic map, the link between Natufian foragers, Bronze Age empires, and today's mosaic of tribes and villages. But to reach them, we need collaboration, not conquest, respect, not rush. Because one tooth could unravel myths, one child's femur could redraw migration routes, and one buried genome could change how an entire region understands itself. In the next episode, we'll trace how ancient Semitic languages travelled without genes, and how that changed the map forever.